I want to start off by acknowledging that those of us that are hosting this project, at least, are hosting from Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We want to recognize that we're all treaty people under the peace and friendship treaties and have responsibilities to each other and to the land under this context. It was feeling really hard to figure out how to sort of bring people along with a conversation about some of the scarier aspects of food, but do that in a way that wasn't overwhelming and that was actually encouraging people to be part of the conversation.
I feel like we all have this responsibility to look at the future and try and do something, and we're all frozen and we don't know what to do. So I just felt like, oh, this is like another excuse, like, oh, I'm too busy, so make time. So I did.
It just seemed like there was an opening and there was willingness to look at the future together and look at our taking for granted beliefs about the food system and look at climate change more deeply.
Climate change in the Maritimes, much like in other places, brings, for the most part, large amounts of uncertainty. You know, giant storms, droughts, higher temperatures make things harder to grow. But also, I was trying to focus people's attention on some of the sort of higher level infrastructure problems that exist in the Maritimes that are going to be exacerbated by climate change.
We were really interested in bringing together a range of people who had different lenses on the food system and actually having some conversations that weren't necessarily happening because people were just so busy with the day-to-day work.
People in social work, people who are kind of simply volunteering at the community garden, people in government, and people with different levels of understanding of the food system as a whole or food production generally.
I've been working really hard in a provincial context, and to break out of that bubble and begin speaking with other people who share my concerns about food production and healthy food was very exciting.
We're doing this with intention and like trying to rally the right people around and really sort of start a deep conversation and not just try to do a little project and then we're done.
60% of agriculture stems from indigenous knowledge. And you're talking about like potatoes and turnips and all this stuff. That is an indigenous to this land, and indigenous people were farming it in ways, and now we're eating it, and people don't make that connection.
Could we create stories instead of kind of contingency scenario plans that would help us plan and help us think about the future?
How do you actually sort of set people up to be able to tell stories about very complex future potential situations in a way that's like both realistic and kind of based in actual possibilities that could come to pass, but also creative and a little bit playful?
Machines were replaced with lighter things, more hands. The two-legged ones had been working hard, some more than others. At times, I can hear disagreements. And then, what I can only describe is the feeling I get when I hear nature's orchestra, when all the different bird calls and nature sounds are in unison. They've found peace in the governance of what they share and are nurturing what feeds them.
And our tasks in each case as a group was to concoct a 5-minute like radio play, a sound composition that would tell one of several different kinds of stories about the future of food.
We took it from the perspective of the land and try to put ourselves in the shoes of the land in terms of what they would be feeling and hearing, over the course of time and then into kind of the future.
The more you talk to everyone who is involved in an ecosystem with different perspectives, the more that you can open up the collaborations, and the more that you can see, oh, well, we can actually work together on this issue. We don't have to agree on everything to be able to move forward together.
I've got an idea. I could use a little more grazing land and you could keep manure. Would you help me set up a website for CSAs? We can start there and figure out how to fix the other stuff as we go. Everyone here is part of the community. That's how we make a good life. We share.
I'd love to do that. I'm so happy we made this move. I can feel we made the right decision. This is the right way to grow together.
We had someone who's a city person going to be a farmer. We had an Indigenous elder. We had someone who is a farmer, someone who works with farms and how can they be viable. So we sort of had all of those ingredients and helped each other out by saying, well, here's how I would think, and this is where I'm coming from. So it was really, we really learned a lot from each other.
Story we had a child asking questions to an elder.
It was a very confusing time. I'm sure you've heard us talk about Uncle Stevie before. You met him when you were just a baby. Stevie used to live in a place called Toronto, far away from us. When the Great Disruption happened, Stevie was working in a grocery store. He worked almost every day and often very long hours. He worked, but he still didn't have enough money to keep paying for his apartment. There was barely enough food for people. Food prices went up really quickly. So Stevie and his friends protested peacefully for 6 days. Then on the 7th day, that's when law enforcement came in. They were all dressed up like they were going to war, wearing riot gear and carrying guns and pepper spray. Stevie did his best to calm them down. He didn't want his friends to get hurt, but he wasn't able to de-escalate the situation. Eventually, things got very, very violent. And Stevie, my dear son, Stevie, poor Stevie didn't make it.
In Nova Scotia, it's quite difficult, especially if you're trying to organize rurally, to be like, climate change, it's scary, like, what do we do? But it's a lot easier to say like, food that tastes good. Why are there so many farms in this area, but no place that I can actually buy food properly? Surely as citizens, we can organize and ask ourselves like, okay, well, what can we do to stabilize and to concretize the infrastructure that makes it possible for good food to come to us?
What felt nice is, even though we did, sometimes disagree, there was still this care for our world, our planet, our connection to food. And that really made it work, I think.
It felt really important that it doesn't happen very often that people come from around the region as opposed to just sort of in a province or even in a specific locality. And so really my biggest hope, I think, was that people would meet and connect and be inspired and learn a lot from each other.
The vibe or the energy that was kind of supported through this process was one that, I think about bringing forward to, some of the work that, I'm involved with or future work. And it's something that I would love to do more, to let our creativity just inform our work more and not be afraid of that as much.
What are you guys doing with all of those little envelopes?
Emma's teaching me about saving seeds. I'm helping her sort her seeds that she saved from last year, and she's telling me about each one and how to pick the best plants for saving the seeds from this year.
Oh, that's cool. The seed companies hate when farmers save seed, but we still do, most years. It's part of Dad's big rebellion, but I'm glad he does it. Some of those are so cool looking.
Here we are, sitting around the table, thinking how we can change this silly mess of a food system. It makes you wonder how many people are doing the same thing right now.
When I listen to the radio in the morning, sometimes I start off the day just devastated. But I often finish my days, listening to something like Ideas and feeling inspired from hearing other people's lived stories. And I just found the same thing happened here, and was thinking like, how cool would it be? I'm, cooking and listening to stories, real stories, or beautiful imagined stories about a new reality and a food-focused reality. That's, to me, the only real way that we can reboot and decalcify our dreaming mechanism.
A bit surprised that climate change was sort of on the docket on everyone's plans, and surprised by even certain industry groups that climate change was like priority one. So that was a bit of a surprise, because it's not the narrative that we hear.
Cooperation and collaboration and these strong networks that build adaptive capacity, they're not the first thing that you think of when you think like, how do we respond to climate change and the way that it affects our food? But I think that they are the undergirding infrastructure out of which every solution needs to come. Being able to respond quickly and with a certain amount of flexibility and in community is going to be more important than any technological solution that can be bandied around. The difficulty is connecting the dots between some of the broader systemic issues that exist around food systems in the provinces and climate change adaptation writ large.
There's like a level of fear that I hadn't really allowed myself to tap into around that, about like, what does it actually mean if there's food shortages?
We still have all of these colonized narratives. We have all of these past system narratives that are no longer relevant in the new normal. And story just helps us like break out of those and find new paths, I guess.
Agriculture is an example. We're highlighting Indigenous elders or knowledge keepers in those areas and bringing them together to be basically our expert committee members, right? And so this is highlighting also the value of our elders in our spaces, that there is knowledge that has been passed down over generations there that we may not have been accessing right now, but now we can draw that out so that the educational material that's shared in the public education system includes that Indigenous knowledge as well, and it's presented as Indigenous knowledge in the context of history, so that youth coming up aren't see that as a potential opportunity, not only in job opportunities but also potentially in an entrepreneurship venture as well.
In a lot of ways, we're in touch with that emotional side of food security. Like it's not being able to get the food you need is a huge stress on people's shoulders day to day.
Everyone has stories about that involve food, and everyone has some sort of emotional resonance or feelings of connection around food. It's such a common shared experience.
And having that creative lens gave us a chance to, I guess, talk about some things that you wouldn't normally talk about with complete strangers. So it was good.
Remember the importance of taking those moments to be inspired or to dream and to share. Often we're so caught up in the day-to-day action plan that we forget to take a step back and sort of regroup and dream things up together and think, long term, 25 years.
It was interesting to me how convergent our thinking about the future and what will give us hope was. So yeah, I thought that was actually really fascinating.
Can we actively create a space where we're generating solutions and action steps? So I do think that the visioning and the storytelling is important to get us there, but then I think a useful next step would be creating a space where action is taken.
There's like a very informal sense of cooperation between different farms in the province, but there isn't like an actual cooperative that has infrastructure to store stuff and transport stuff across province and make institutional sales. The idea of how do you have proper communities built up around food production that allow for a diversified and resilient food system is a question that would be interesting whether climate change was important or not. It's essential that like organizing move beyond just like a couple of individual producers and towards a concerted provincial effort.
The key to it seems to be a kind of persistent collaboration, a search for consensus that proves more powerful than those boundaries, barriers, and illusions.
Within the food space, I think there are opportunities to expand on in communities, exploring, well, hearing these stories, but then building on the stories. I think in other spaces, more spaces need to work with story to look at the future.
Each have something to contribute, and each of our voices can kind of build on the others to create a more full picture of what could be.